Okay, we're about 20 participants total, so we can go ahead and get started, Sima, and I'll keep letting people in as they show up, but you have the floor.
Thank you. So yeah, good morning, good morning, good morning. I know it's really hot out there, so thank you all for just being here, and I know there's lots going on, and also just the Zoom situation is not ideal to say the least, but it's just, yeah, it feels that much more meaningful that we're all here together and y'all made the time. So really, really appreciate it. And I'm just gonna start us off with kind of a little quick grounding activity. We're gonna do a quick meditation. And if you feel comfortable turning your screen off to save your eyes, if you wanna look away, whatever feels comfortable, do what works for you. But feel free, I'm just gonna invite you to take a few deep breaths together. And if you want to, and if you're able to, if you feel comfortable, you could put your legs firmly on the ground so you could feel the floor hold you beneath you. And just gently lay your hands on your knees. And just take a second to just really sink into your body. So no pressure, just whatever feels natural. Just kind of notice how your body naturally wants to be in this moment. And just remind yourself, remember and recognize that there's nowhere that you need to be right now except for exactly where you are. You are right on time. And I'm gonna ring a little bell for us. And when I ring the bell, take a second, find your breath. Wherever it is, no judgment, fast, slow, just see if you can notice it. Just pause here for a moment in this space. And just notice that you're breathing, you are alive, there is ground beneath you. Whatever responsibilities or expectations you have for the rest of the day today after our time together, it's nothing that you need to worry about right now. Just see if you could feel anything, if you have any sensations on your face, in your neck, in your shoulders. If you feel a little bit tense, now's an opportunity to just see if you could breathe into it, relax a little bit deeper. And just notice your arms and your hands. Notice how your fingers want to fall and how they're sitting and feeling in this moment. Give them some love. Notice your belly. A lot of times we store a lot of tension in our stomach. And so just notice if there's anything there, maybe some anxiety. And just give it a little warm greeting, no judgment, just notice it, welcome it. All the time coming back to your breath, notice your legs, your knees, your calves, ankles, your feet, your toes. Just say good morning to your feet, to parts of your body that maybe don't get that much love. And just again, coming back to the breath. Just notice how you're feeling in your body, no judgment, nowhere to be, you're exactly on time. I'm gonna ring the bell again, and when I do, I invite you at your own pace, whatever feels comfortable, to just gently open your eyes if they were closed, and welcome to come back into space with us. All right. Welcome, 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 welcome. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, for making the time. Appreciate you all. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started, and it's fine, yeah, if more people trickle in down the ways, but just want to do a quick introduction and kind of give you an overview of what we're gonna talk about today, and Sarah will do a quick introduction as well. So my name is Sima, and I just recently had the privilege of getting started working with NCLT as a resident advocate and community mediator. And a lot of my background is actually in education. So I originally started working in schools, and when I was working in schools, I learned about the school to prison pipeline. And that's when I started doing some programming within the justice system. And it was really there I got introduced to restorative justice and peacemaking and conflict reconciliation. I started doing more circles inside. And what that sparked for me was an interest in community activism and the need for systemic change in the inside, but also on the outside. And so I started working with different local organizations. And one of the things that I noticed through that transition was just how much conflict there is on all levels in all of our organizations, personally, interpersonally, systemically, right? Like everywhere. And just really notice how normal and pervasive it is. And so I really wanted to think about that a little bit more deeply, and started thinking about what does it mean to be engaged in peace building. And so so that's what kind of got me interested in conflict reconciliation and resolution, because there's so much infighting within our organizations. And a lot of times we were doing the work out there, but we weren't often healing the conflict and internal struggles. And so I had the privilege of getting trained as a formal mediator and restorative justice practitioner. And that's kind of where my heart is in the moment. And it's also one of those things where, you know, I've always lived in co-ops and lived in collective household and shared housing situations. And similarly, just noticing within our intimate spaces, how much harder it can feel to really practice this work. And so I really feel called to facilitate and give tools for capacity building and conflict reconciliation, but also I'm always thinking in my personal life, how am I engaging with my neighbors? I currently live in a low equity co-op thanks to POC Sustainable Housing Network and the Northern California Land Trust here in Berkeley. And it's a lot harder. You know, I could talk about this stuff all day, but it's a lot harder when I'm in conflict with my neighbors to actually practice it. So my goal is for you all to get tools to be able to think differently about conflict, so that when you're in the middle of it, in the intimate spaces with neighbors, with family, we're able to actually practice these tools and apply them in a way that's going to feel meaningful in our lives and in our broader communities also. And so I just wanted to, share a little bit about that. And I wanted to ask you all if you want to just take a second, and we're going to do a more thorough kind of workshop overview in a little bit, but if you want to just drop in the chat and just take a minute and just check in after a meditation and see if you have any kind of expectations for the day today, for our time together, or if there's anything that you'd like us to address in the workshop, or any questions or kind of big picture of what it is that brought you here. Just take like a minute or two to kind of just get grounded in kind of what is your intention for our time today. And it's also just to say, perfectly fine if you're like, I don't know, I'm just here exploring and I'm open to whatever. And I don't really know what to expect, and or don't have any expectations. Awesome, thank you. Someone said, I'd like to know the name of 2 or 3 authors and thinkers on this subject. Okay, great. Yeah, so you could definitely share that out. And See, Amanda also says, feel more comfortable with conflict as a natural part of cohabitation and collective governance. Absolutely. Melody says, hi, I've lived in communal housing before. In the future, I'd like to hear about conflict resolution, especially as it relates to COVID. Yeah, that's real. Around tensions around race. Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so just take some time and throughout the workshop, yeah, think about some more kind of what you'd like to get. And at any time, feel free to kind of drop it in the chat if there's anything that you want to bring up. Okay, great. Thank y'all. So yeah, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to do kind of a quick KOI intro and a little bit more grounding for us, and then take it from there.
Okay. We're going to be jumping back from sharing my screen to the gallery view. Just really grateful to have you all here with us this morning. So just a brief overview for those who are connecting for the first time with the Community Co-Ownership Initiative. It grew out of a partnership between the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network and the Northern California Land Trust. And it's a training series that seeks to diversify and expand access to shared ownership and resident controlled housing and the different ways that that looks, and provide supportive spaces to cultivate relationships between different people, common vision, resource sharing, and with the goal of centering Black, Indigenous, other people of color, and low-income people-led housing, land, and projects. And we're very excited today, since we've gotten onto Zoom as a platform. We've tended to do some more of a presentation lecture style of things, and are just really excited to try to make this an interactive and more sharing space today, and grateful for Sima for helping think through about how we could do that. And this is the end of our collective land and housing series. We've gone through history, finance and budgeting, and now conflict reconciliation. And you'll be getting these slides later. And then you'll also have access to past videos and workshop slides from the other two workshops that were in this series.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, before we get started, one of the things we always like to do at the beginning of workshops is a land acknowledgement. And I wanted to shout out, so part of land acknowledgement is really recognizing that we are on unceded Ohlone territory. And so for anyone being in the Bay Area, really in the, in the United States, it's all colonized land. And so thinking about what does it mean to be living in a place that was actually not given, but acquired violently and consensually. And what are the greater implications of that, especially as we're talking about co-ownership, right? So I wanted to shout out to Segurite Land Trust, which is, and folks want to just give kind of like a quick thumbs up or drop in the chat. Has anyone heard of Segurite Land Trust before? Does that name sound familiar? Is it something totally new? Or yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. So Segurite Land Trust is an urban Indigenous woman-led land trust that was co-founded by Karina Gold, who's a local Bay Area activist. And really their intention, pulled from their website, says to facilitate the return of Indigenous land to Indigenous people through practices of rematriation, cultural revitalization, and land restoration, and to heal and transform legacies of colonization, genocide, and patriarchy to do the work our ancestors and our future generations are calling us to do. And so one of the things that's so unique about Segurite Land Trust is if you go to their website, they actually break down per tax bracket, there's an opportunity for folks to give a voluntary land tax to pay for reparations for the land. And so all the information is there at their website, seguritelandtrust.org. And I really encourage you all, whether you or not you're able to donate at this time, or whatever works for you is perfectly fine, but just take an opportunity to kind of check out their website and look at kind of some of the work that they've been doing, because they're working on some interesting projects. And part of that is also just to really acknowledge and uplift the fact that Native people have been erased throughout our cultural narratives and histories, and culture is still very much alive and active today. And there's tons of Native activists that are still bringing attention to the land and the work that they're doing. So just want to shout out to Segurite Land Trust and start us off with the land acknowledgement today. And so we're going to move on to workshop overview of what we're going to get into for the rest of the day today. And then if there's any other questions after that, feel free to also just drop it in the chat at any time. So part of the workshop, we're going to be talking about an intro to Kingian Nonviolence. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in a bit about kind of what that is and where that comes from. And then within the Kingian framework, we're going to talk about types and levels of conflict. We're going to be talking about different decision-making tools that y'all could use in different community spaces, and also some tactics and tools for de-escalation. So one of the things that, another reason I wanted to start off with talking about land acknowledgement and Segurite land trust. It's a really good segue to talk about, have a conversation about how access to land has always been a political issue that's been rooted in social struggles. And so community land trust, and I think in the first workshop series of CORE, they kind of went over a little bit of the history of land trust. But just to say that they rose to really bring light to the fact that they arose out of the 1960s and the civil rights era of that time, the movement that was happening in the South. And so leaders were really reconsidering ways to secure greater economic and political independence for African-American farmers. And it was Slater King, he was a cousin of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he worked to create one of the first CLTs of the time, New Communities, Inc. And so there's some really great literature out there around New Communities, Inc. that I encourage you all to look into. And we're not going to spend, today we're not going to spend too much time kind of going over the history, but I do want to just kind of make that connection because I think it is really important to make sure that we're honoring the activism of that era and just recognizing the work of folks that have come before us. And so I think the connection to Dr. King is really relevant because especially in context of today in this current political climate, talking within Black Lives Matters and also just within COVID, thinking about different race relations and how conflict is getting escalated in different ways, to think about how are we using peace building skills and how are we being strategic in the ways that we're relating with each other. And so Kingian Nonviolence is a philosophy and a practice that arose out of the Southern Freedom Movement, civil rights movement. And the story goes that it was Dr. King who was working with Dr. Bernard Lafayette at the time. And Dr. Lafayette he was one of the directors of he was the national coordinator of the Poor People's Campaign. And so he's working very closely with Dr. King at the time. And it was a conversation that Dr. King had with Dr. Lafayette, one of the last conversations that they had. And Dr. Lafayette didn't know this at the time, but one of the last conversations they had, Dr. King, at the end of the Poor People's Campaign, turns to Dr. Lafayette and says, our next campaign needs to be a call to institutionalize peace. And Dr. Lafayette, or Doc for short, he didn't kind of know or really understand what King meant by that at the time. And unfortunately, he never got a chance to finish that conversation because it was really soon afterwards that Dr. King was shot outside of his hotel room in Memphis, Tennessee, 1968. And so Dr. Lafayette sat with this and he was really thinking about what does that mean, right? To institutionalize peace, to really make peace accessible, to bring it into all of our spaces and to really institutionalize it. And so he came up with the principles of nonviolence based off of Dr. King's work. And he worked with another well-known civil rights activist at the time, Dr. David Jensen. And they both worked together to create the Kingian Nonviolence training curriculum. And the intention was to train young activists to really be able to heed Dr. King's philosophies of militant nonviolence and understand what that means in their work. So the training curriculum, Kingian Nonviolence, it's been used now all over the world and tons of countries, thousands of millions of trainings happen, and folks continue to this day to kind of work within that same lineage. And one of the things that's really powerful about Kingian Nonviolence is that it's a really active approach to nonviolence. So a lot of times when we think about nonviolence, we think about violence as taking kind of a passive stance. And Dr. King was actually advocating for the opposite. He said, no, we need to be militant as the Army is, we need to be as militant in our practices of nonviolence. And so it feels like a good way to kind of frame the conversations for today, because part of the conversations, part of what he was really teaching was just about the need for us to live in a world where people are treated equitably and also with equality. And so the way that that happens, he was always coming back to our shared values and commonalities. And Dr. King really emphasizes need for shared values. And it was Dr. Bernard through the Kingian trainings that really made that more accessible. And one of the main things that they talk about when talking about shared values is recognizing that our values are actually the same. And I want to take a second, and if we could actually just get out of screen share for a second, and if y'all want to take a second in the chat, kind of, you know, what are some, as you're thinking about kind of co-housing and thinking about sharing space and community, what are some values that you feel like are really important to you that you want to share with others, or that you feel like you want to defend in your living spaces? So kindness, yeah. Generosity, right? Respect, kindness, equity, respect and communication, to listen to everyone, honor self-care as an act of love, safety, compromise, listening, empathy, listening, right? And so one of the things that was so interesting about, let's see, apologize. I'm gonna turn my mic up. It is a little bit hard to hear. Hope that's better. Yeah, if at any time, if you'd like me to slow down, if it's hard to hear, please just let me know, drop a note in the chat, and I'll take notice. Thank you. So one of the reasons that we ask about what are your values when you're thinking about sharing space is that a lot of times when we're in conflict, we think, oh, well, this person just doesn't agree with me, or we think that we have conflicting values, or they just, you know, we just have like differing opinions, or we just have differing politics or differing values or differing lifestyles. And the reality is that we always, as human beings, we all have shared values, right? And so you could see clearly in the chat, multiple people have named respect, equity, feeling heard, compromise, empathy, consideration. And so the issue isn't about values, right? A lot of times we get stuck there and we can't get past our values differences, but the issue is never about values. We all want the same things. We all want to feel safe in our homes. We all want to be respected. We all want to feel seen, regardless of our identity markers, regardless of our human past experiences. The values are the same. And so we do this exercise. It's been done in different countries, different institutions around the world, in prisons, in schools, of different continents. And at the end of the day, the human experience is that we all have shared values. We all want to be affirmed in our humanity. And that looks different in different contexts and different times and different places, right? Because there are societal conditions and there are systemic oppression, and that's real. But the more we could kind of get through our values differences and kind of reframe our minds to think about our commonalities, the more we could kind of work through and unpack the layers of, okay, what's really here that we're working with. And so I start with that, kind of talking about values and encouraging you all to kind of think about our values, because a lot of times when we think about conflict, we think about, well, I should ask you all. So when you think about conflict or when you think about violence, just, you could shout it out in, let's see, if we could unmute yourselves if you want to just shout it out, or write it in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with. What are some words that come to mind when you think about conflict or when you hear the word violence?
Disagreement.
Disagreement, yeah. Yeah. Distrust, yep.
Rage. Anger.
Under?
Anger. When there is a conflict, then there is a lot of anger.
Like the rage, like the anger that you have for, yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Shutting down, yeah. So a lot of times when we talk about, so I asked that question because a lot of times when we talk about nonviolence, it's important for us to also, we forget to think about, well, what is violence? Like, what is it that we're actually talking about? It becomes really abstract. And so we're going to do a quick activity in just a moment. And I'm going to invite you all, actually, Sarah is going to kindly facilitate you all kind of breaking off into different breakout rooms. And I want you all to, and we could, let's see, put our slide back up with the instructions so y'all could see. I'm going to share out. I'm going to ask you all to kind of go. Let's see. There it is. There it is. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you all to take 15 minutes in your breakout groups and see if you could complete the sentence, violence is, in 4 words or less. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say for now. Violence is in 4 words or less. And then we're going to come back with the whole group and we're going to unpack that in just a little bit. So does everyone understand the instructions? We feel good?
So we have to agree. We
Yes,
have to come up with a common that we all agree. Yeah.
Yes, the collective common definition. Exactly. Thank you for clarifying.
I would put control in there.
What did you say?
Control, sorry. Especially thinking about all the systems that Nora named. Control, and then the experience of that as one of repression, restriction.
Combine some different approaches to thinking about violence, whether it's the experience, what it creates, the kinds of systems that it creates, why people turn to it, and thinking about how to do that in 4 words, if possible.
So
I'm going to throw a couple things out there and you tell me what you think. Well, okay, so this is too long, but violence, oh shoot. Is it okay if we get rid of is and make it a different verb? I'm just pushing all the rules here.
just do it and see what you get.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I wrote down violence uses force to destroy respect, but I think maybe I like better violence uses force to control.
Everyone is back.
Beautiful. All right. So just, yeah, really quick, like thumbs up, sideways, down. What was that experience like of trying to come up with your sentences? Okay. It's a positive thumbs up for the most part. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, if we're gonna, Sarah's gonna kindly record everyone's sentences. And so I think hopefully every group has 1 person to report back. So whoever was in group 1, do y'all want to share whatever your sentence was that y'all came up with?
How do we know what number group we're in? I don't know that I caught that.
Diane, that's us. Would you mind reporting back for us?
So, so Diane, why don't, we'll just start with whatever group you were in and then we'll go person by person. So, hi, do you want to share? Yeah, do you want to report back? Share the sentence you all came up with?
Sure, I wrote everything down, so I'll report back. We came up with violence is systemic, pervasive, insidious, and harmful.
Nice, thank you. And yeah, maybe some like jazz fingers if that also resonates with folks. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you all. Okay, so let's see who all. What's another group? How do we do this? Kate, were you in a different group? Or does anybody want to volunteer? Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Okay, I think I was in group 4.
Yeah, you were.
Okay, so I'm gonna nominate Nora to sign off and give us our words.
Okay. Well, the words that we chose was violence uses force to control.
Uses force to control. 4 words. Wow, y'all are really on it. Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you. Yeah, how jazz fingers, if that also resonates with folks, that definition. Violence uses force to control. Yes, it does. This is true. All right, thank you, group. We'll say group 2 for the sake of this, where we're at. And then does somebody else want to volunteer to report back what they shared in their group, what y'all came up with?
We were group 2, so we might as well go into the queue. We actually came up with 2 different renditions. One of them I think resonates with the one just before. It was violence is inflicting emotional / physical harm when we look at it from the point of a perpetrator. And then there's another sentence of violence is the symptom of disconnection when we were talking about the source of violence, whether you're the perpetrator or victimized.
Yeah, so I had like 2 separate sentences. So is violence as a source of disconnection?
A symptom of disconnection, right, or source, yeah, or
Sorry,
symptom, it's a symptom, yeah. Violence is the symptom of disconnection.
And then what was the first sentence?
Was violence is inflicting emotional / physical harm. You could get rid of inflicting and it's emotional or physical harm, or stick in the verb inflicting and it's emotional / physical harm. That's how we made it for.
I love it. I love this activity because people always get creative with grammar, and it's a fun way to just play with language. Yeah. Nice. Thank you all. I love that. Okay. And I love, yeah, that definition. Thank you. Cool. Okay. So yeah, I see some hands. So it also resonates with folks, right? So when we say that it's a symptom of disconnection, we all know what that means. That resonates. And then we had, I think, 2 more groups. Someone else? Yeah, Amanda, you want to volunteer?
Sure, yeah, this comes from group 3. And I'll just note that we settled on this, but there's still a lot of discussion about some of the words here and like what they mean and different interpretations. But we said violence is self-centered, harmful, controlling, easy.
Yeah, I feel that. Thank you all for sharing that. And yeah, go to next group if we have a volunteer that wants to share your definitions. Do I see a volunteer? Soma integrative, is that a hand? You want to read out your sentence? I think you're muted, love.
Hi, it's Mel. Sorry, I'm doing laundry. So we have a, similar to other groups, we didn't come up with one necessarily, but it's sort of a variety of thoughts. Someone said it's something that we need to learn about. Someone said it is a result of frustrated emotions. Someone said something else that they can chime in on that I'm forgetting right now, but I'm saying can be very subconscious. It's something that is present in all of us and we all have capacity for and all need to learn about. It is something transformable and healable, and a number of things that, connected to what other folks said too. And Mary, did you want to say what you said? Because I couldn't remember.
Well, this is Maria. So I would like to say that assignment, it wasn't well understood. And I had technical problems because people couldn't hear me. I don't know. Can you hear me well now?
We can hear you, and I think it was understood. It's okay. I mean, we just shared a mix of things.
Well, it's a little bit easier because of the problems I had. People couldn't hear me. I was in the backyard. So anyway, we came to 4 definitions, and we didn't come to unify a statement or definition.
Yeah, and so that's a great segue. So what I wanted to kind of ask about for our debrief is kind of what was that experience like of working with your groups to try to come up with a shared definition, 4 words or less? What did that feel like? Did it, what was that like for you all?
Well, to me, it was frustrating because I had problems with the microphone. And so I was working, so people couldn't hear me. They were very attentive, but they want to know, notes or everything. So, it was very good, but it was my issue that affected everybody as the group in general.
Yeah, thank you.
But we were trying to do our best, even with that limitation, to support her and do what we could do with what we had, and everyone was able to give their input, which was great.
Nice. Does anyone, yeah, thank you all for that. Does anyone else from any other groups want to share about the experience of coming up with the definitions? Was it, did that feel challenging? Was it easy? Was it hard? Was it, did you enjoy that or was it frustrating? Yeah, Sabare. Oh, I think you're muted. There you go.
I really liked the process because I felt like I was able to form my own thoughts as other people were sharing their thoughts, and trying to come up with like only 4 words that can, because violence of course is a very, it's a very big big thing. It's not only one thing, like we can look at it from multiple angles. So like trying to come up with only 4 words, I felt like the group process was very good, was very helpful.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad that you had that experience. That's great. And so, yeah, Joy.
I just wanted to add something that I appreciated about the experience was in our group, taking the invitation of coming up with the 4 words and then just also acknowledging that, well, do we have to follow the rule so strictly, and I just thought it was yeah, I just thought that it was a nice part of the process of how do we engage in a way that feels like we're being inclusive amongst ourselves, and then also how is it that we, have the purpose of it also be serving, something that we consent to, even if it might not be exactly what was given as the instructions.
And I love, one of the things that I really love and appreciate about that, and like I was saying earlier, that it's a fun activity because people always get creative with it, and the ways that they present it is because it can feel like really challenging. I mean, it was a big ask, and I acknowledge and I want to own that it was a big ask of you all to come up with the 4 words or less definition. And sometimes folks get stuck in that space of conflict and struggle, and just want to like name and really reiterate that conflict is neutral, and it really is. Like, it's one of the big conceptions about conflict. We're taught to think it's this big scary thing because it's uncomfortable, but conflict in and of itself is neutral, and it's really about recognizing our responses to conflict. So one group might come up with 2 different sentences. One group might come up with an expanded sentence with different words and languaging and definitions, or get creative with grammar, and there's different ways to approach it. And so really thinking about a lot of kind of the takeaway from this workshop that I want to offer you all is to think about how are we engaging with our responses to conflict, and really taking the stigma out of conflict itself. And so being able to just, be in a space of creativity. And so another thing that I noticed is interesting about when I first before we started the activity, kind of asked you all, when you think about violence, what are some things you think about? And folks were able to come up with definition really in one word or in a couple words. People said it's distrust, it's forget some of the other words that folks said, but it was it was a really kind of simple kind of definition, and that resonates, right? When folks say that violence is what group was it? And I apologize, I'm going to butcher it. I think Joya was your group. You said systematic of, it was a symptom of disconnection. Right, so when you say it, so just in a few words, right, like people know what that means. And so violence is a really big concept, and there's so many layers, and it is so systemic, and we could get into all the different histories and legacies of struggle and resistance. And, right, like when you go into community space in a classroom, like I said, my background is in education, working with elementary age students. If a 7-year-old says to me, that's painful, when a 7-year-old says violence is painful, I know exactly what she's talking about. Everyone in the room knows exactly what she's talking about, and it resonates. And there's that feeling of like, oh yeah, that's violence. It's the spirit of violence. It's the feeling. And a lot of times what happens is when we're talking about violence, and especially when we're in the midst of conflict, when we're in that space of collaborating with others and trying to get to shared understanding, where all of a sudden it gets a lot harder to get to the heart of the matter. What is it that's at the core of this? What's that one word? What's that feeling? And it becomes this very abstract thing very quickly. And there's a tendency oftentimes in community spaces and activist spaces, just in general, right, to kind of intellectualize everything really, to intellectualize and to really, to kind of like, to come up with, to intellectualize our struggles and to kind of lose that what's really at the heart of the matter at the core. And so someone just shared a quote with me recently that I really love. It says, the 18 inches from the head to the heart, that's the longest journey you'll ever embark on in your life. And I love that. And that resonated for me so much. It was like, oh yeah, so much of my work personally that I want to share in the world is just really coming back to the heart and heart center. And so I want to, I'm talking a lot, but I say that to encourage you all to think about when you are in the midst of conflict, you going back to the head and thinking about what is it that I need to communicate. Practice just coming back to self and thinking about that experience of just 4 words or less, 1 word. What is the feeling? What is the spirit? What is at the heart of this? And again, like, I recognize and own that that's a really big ask, right? And that's why I have full empathy. It wasn't an easy task that you all did, that you engage with, but it's a practice. And so just always wanting to come back to that and know that it's more about the spirit of violence. And when you share it and come from that place, it resonates and people know what that means. And so, someone said that was a great ask. Thank you. It was an opportunity, plenty of opportunities to practice always, right? So just encourage you all to think about conflict as an opportunity to practice and really coming back to yourselves is what work is about. And so I'm gonna, I think we're gonna take just a short break in a minute here. Because I'm talking a lot, but I wanna hear from you all also. Was there any, after discussing it some more, are there any kind of like questions or musings or anything that kind of comes up around that exercise that we just did? And if not, that's, perfectly fine too. We could take some time to just kind of sink into it a little bit, but just wanted to open it up if there's anything anyone wanted to share about that.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go on, Jorge.
Oh, thank you, Melody. I just wanted to appreciate the activity because we talk about violence a lot, even like in our work, and never really took the time to ask people what their interpretation was of that word. And so just appreciating the activity as a tool to be able to use in community to just be curious about what other people think and feel, and as it relates to violence and what's violent to them, because I mean, I think we have different degrees or levels of receiving it and understanding it. So appreciating the activity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's so real. A lot of times when we're in conflict, we think, well, this person just doesn't care. Like, why, this is so important. They just don't care. And the reality is people have such different experiences that we're working from, and different ways that we're oriented in this world, and different ways of approaching conflict, and things we assign meaning in different ways. And so there's assumptions about what is violence to people, and what could feel really emotionally or physically impacting to one person might not be the case for another body, right? Or another person. And so just always remembering, coming back to self and thinking about what is my experience in this and how can I frame this as an opportunity.
May I?
Yes, please. Is that Melody?
Yeah, Sima, thanks. Also, when you use that example with the child citing painful or pain, it brought something up for me, and that's just personally reflecting on when is leaving room for me for when something is maybe not violent, but it's painful because it's something that I've not yet dealt with. And also I've been thinking a lot about how it's really interesting. I've been speaking to two different people experience of the same situation, and whether it's grandmother, mother, 2 friends, and just seeing how wildly different their actual, even their understanding of reality was so different that I just feel like I've been trying to make space around I don't know how to even verbalize it. I guess just around not having definitive ideas about things and leaving space for how people have experienced things differently.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for mentioning the intergenerational experience also. And, you know, a lot of times we talk about, one thing that brings up from you, Melody, when you were sharing, it just reminds me how often we talk about violence as this, again, this like external thing that's out there. But internal violence is also a very real thing. And so when we're thinking about violence and kind of noticing, as we're engaging in peace building and nonviolence and noticing violence along the way, thinking about how are we inflicting violence on ourselves? Like, when are we holding and releasing, and when are we creating tension in our own bodies, and how can we better self-regulate as well? It's a really important piece of the work. So again, always just coming back to self, and yeah, just noticing the signs. And so I want to transition on that note. We're gonna do a quick little activity, but before we actually do that, oh yeah, thank you, Sarah. So take a second and just check in with yourselves. And yeah, after that activity, kind of where are you all at? If you want to just drop in the chat in a little emoji feeling face, we don't have to always use our words, right? It's really about the feeling. What is it that's coming up for you right now? Yeah, just take a second to check in so you get a quick little temperature check, how we're all doing, make sure we're all still feeling all right there. Let's see. Arlene says, where are the emojis? Good question. Does do folks have? Yeah, you know what? I don't know if thank you, you got a smiley face. I don't know if everyone has access. Oh, there we go. Okay, we got some. I apologize. I know Zoom isn't the most inclusive. We're trying our best. Okay. So feels like we're pondering. Okay, blowing a kiss. Probably one of the people's on their phone. Curious, thoughtful. Awesome, thank you. And if you can't share an emoji in the chat, just take a second and look at, like, really reflect on all the different symbols and just check in with yourself and notice, yeah, how you're feeling in this moment. Which one is resonating and speaking to you? Tired, energized, cool, okay. So I want to, yeah, we're gonna go back to, let's see, gallery view here. And I'm gonna ask you all to take a minute, because I want you all to get up and move too. I know it's a lot to just be in one place and dealing with all the technology and Zoom. So I want you to get up and move around and take a minute and do like a quick scavenger hunt and go through your living space wherever you're at. Just a couple minutes, take like 2 minutes, and see if you could find one object, share back with the group. And this is going to be an object that for you represents a feeling of home and land, something that's grounding. You know, when you're thinking about sharing space with folks, really thinking about the idea of home and coming back to self, something that makes you feel centered in yourself, grounded, something that feels familiar, reminds you of home. And I'm going to share back in just a minute here. So yeah, go ahead, just take 2 minutes, and then we'll share back. Back. I'm gonna let folks kind of continue to trickle in, but we're gonna go ahead and yeah, pick right back up. So does anybody got a chance to stretch and move around a little bit? Does anybody want to share out any of their objects that they have that they reminded them of home or belonging?
I do.
Connection. Yeah, Maria.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, so there is a tree, a plant. I just going to go. I just going to go to the plant because it's very big. It's beautiful. So actually, can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is story. So behind it, And there is a guy I was going out with, and he was going to throw the plant in the garbage, and it was very tiny. So I kept it in my house. And then after a few years, I decided to change it of the place. And so when I changed the place, it grew up. And so now it's almost out of control because it's very close to the ceiling. It's like a pine tree, but it's not native. So I can't donate it to anybody. And I don't know where to plant it. So because I feel like it's my baby, so I don't want to abandon, but at one point I will have to because it will reach the ceiling. So this is a really sign of hope, because things, if you take care of them and then you move it at the right time, they grow on their own. So that's it. I'm going to move back. So this is great.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to, yeah, thank you. I want to invite everyone, if you're able to, just hold up your objects on the count of 3, and we could all put it up to our video so we could see what everybody brought. Does that sound okay? Good? Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Oh.
I love it. Yes. Got some pictures, some photos. I think some stuffed animals. Nice. Feather. Oh, does anyone else want to share about their objects?
Oh, that's cute.
I won't call out anyone. I don't want to put folks on the spot. If anyone else wants to share, you're welcome to.
Mine is a little frog, and it's full of lavender. So it smells of lavender, and I've had it a very, very long time, like over 20 years. So that's why it reminds me of home, and I love the smell.
Nice. Yeah, thank you all. It's so important to know that, you know, wherever we go, like emotionally, physically in our bodies, that we could always come back to home, right? There's always memories, there's always objects, there's always relationships, there's always things that we could come back to help ground, and just to know what those things are, to make sure that we're finding those pathways to be able to come back to home. So important. Cool. Okay, so we're gonna move on. So we talked a little bit earlier just about kind of, the Kingian Nonviolence framework, and also what is violence and how do we talk about violence and nonviolence. And now we're gonna get into, and just also, destigmatizing conflict and recognizing that conflict is more actually about our responses to conflict than about the conflict itself. And there's plenty of opportunities to always practice that. And so we're gonna go a little bit deeper into that now and kind of talk about what are the actual types of conflicts and levels of conflict. Because some of you, very appropriately and intuitively named, conflict is really big. It's a really big thing. It can feel really big. And so in the Kingian Nonviolence framework, break down conflict as 3 different things. And so there's a pathway conflict, mutually exclusive conflict, a distributive conflict, and a values conflict. And I'm gonna ask if I could invite somebody to read the quote on the bottom of this slide here.
I'll read it.
Thank you, Amani.
Conflict is the spirit of the relationship asking itself to deepen. Anonymous.
And I love that quote because for me, it captures so much the spirit of the conflict and the nature of relationship and how it is so relational inherently. And so we're going to kind of unpack. So there's 4 different types of conflict. And we're going to unpack them a little bit. So pathway conflict, the first one. Could somebody read that one out loud for us?
Same overall goals, different methods for reaching them.
Yeah, and so same overall goals, different methods for reaching them. And so an example of that could be, one of the kind of classic examples that this reminds me of is parenting, right? So if you have 2 parents that maybe have different parenting styles, but they're co-parenting for the sake of their child, their goal is the same. Both parents want their children to be happy and healthy and feel secure and confident. but that doesn't mean they're always going to go about things the same way or make the same decisions in how they approach that. And so, yeah, there's lots of different examples of pathway conflicts. And I wonder if does anyone else kind of have an idea or an example of what that might be? Or what does that bring up for you when you think about pathway conflict? Maybe somebody we haven't heard from as much yet.
I can say something about that.
Yeah, thank you.
I live with the person, and I'm always giving him, when he says, oh, I'm about to do this, I'm about to hang up these clothes. Oh, why don't you just put them all over here, get the hangers, put them here, and then I'm always giving a whole, like, well, that's how I do it, but you can do it however you want. But I always explain my way, even without thinking about it, like second nature. And then I'm like, I see his face, and I'm like, or if you have a way, you know, that works too. As long as the clothes get in the closet.
There you go, right? So finding what is the commonality. So you both want the clothes to get hung or taken care of. And so however it is, you need to get there. You might have different methods of doing it, but just, yeah, knowing that they're shared goals. Thank you. That's a really relevant example. And so one of the ways I also think about the pathway conflict, I have kind of a visual hand symbol for each of these. It's a little silly, but it helps to have like an embodied experience of it to help ground and remember each one. So for the pathway conflict, I kind of think about the little triangle. So just, yeah, if you want to practice, just really think about it as we're talking about it, to like put up the triangle and to remind yourself that we have, you know, there might be different goals or ways of doing it, but the end goal, you're trying to get to the same point, right? So there is shared commonality there, but we might do it a little differently, and that's perfectly fine. That's okay. And so Jeannie says, in my experience, people frequently view the method as just as important as the goal. Yeah, and Jeannie, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
I don't think Jenny has access to voice.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
But she just put it in the chat.
Yeah, so my way is the right way, right? Exactly. Yes. So getting stuck on the method and the path itself instead of actually focusing on the goal and what is it that needs to get done ultimately. Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you all. So that's the pathway conflict, right? And so the next conflict, that's a common type of conflict that we often see, is a mutually exclusive conflict. So does somebody want to read that one out loud?
Different goals choose to function together.
Different goals that choose to function together. And the hand symbol for that one to help remember, and this actually comes from the Highlander Civil Rights Training Center that was recently burned down, a couple years ago now. My sense of time is so weird during COVID, but it came from the Kingian curriculum. They really believed in the embodied learning experience. And so this is the mutually exclusive symbol. So it's different goals, but you're choosing to function together. And so this is one of the ones, it's kind of a classic example when I think of sharing, like shared living spaces, right? You're choosing to live together. Maybe it's cheaper rent, maybe it's out of necessity. For whatever reasons, you're choosing to function together. You might not necessarily have the same goals. You might not necessarily want the same things in the end. Maybe one person is, you know, saving to move. Maybe one person is really invested in trying to build community. Whatever the situation is, you're still, regardless, you're choosing to function together because for sake of necessity, for different reasons, right? So does anyone have another example for that, or something? What does that make you think of when you think about mutually exclusive conflict? And it's okay if there's, you know, like nothing coming to mind right now. I just kind of want to give you all the different terms and the different ideas. So then when you start to see conflict unfold in real life, right, you'll start to notice the signs and be like, oh yeah, that's mutually exclusive, or that's whatever it is. And so Jeannie says priorities and what gets done first. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So you might be working with another person and they might, you know, have different things that's more meaningful to them, but you're still choosing to work together because you want to get, you know, you want to eventually get whatever it is done that needs to get done. Great, thank you. Okay, and we're going to come back to these in a little later, and I'm going to give you all a chance to practice, but just want to kind of give you the overview beforehand. So that is our mutually exclusive conflict, and sort of like a and/or thing. And then this distributive conflict. Somebody want to read that one out loud, please? Maybe somebody again that we haven't heard from as much. I don't want to call on folks. Okay. It's okay.
The perception of not enough resources for everyone.
The perception of not enough resources for everyone. And this one is really important. The key word here is perception, right? And so the kind of classic example of distributive conflict is our government, right? Congress of, there's an idea, oh, we don't have money to house the homeless, or we don't have money for healthcare. And if we actually just tax the rich, the 1%, right? Thinking of the Occupy movement, the reality is, or food scarcity in this country is such a huge issue, especially right now, right? We think, oh, there's just not enough resources. There's enough food to feed everybody. There's enough houses. There's tons of, you know, houses that are, that have been foreclosed, that are empty. If we actually just reallocated our resources and redistributed our resources, we can make sure everybody's needs get met. But there's the perception or the feeling of, oh, there just isn't enough, and there's a scarcity culture. And so distributive conflict is more about, and the sign for distributive conflict is like this, like a little circle to kind of rearrange. And again, I know it's silly, but I really want to encourage you all to practice the signs, because it does kind of help make the body connection. And so if you actually like move around and we rearrange some resources, we could all get our needs met. And this is another classic example for neighbor disputes as well. You know, a lot of times in lease agreements, for example, it might outline something in regards to shared space in co-housing. So there shouldn't be items left in shared space. Shared space should be cleaned up after. But what does shared space mean to each individual? That's kind of the question, right? And so for some people, shared space might mean you don't leave anything in shared space. There's not an, right? There's you want to have, people want to be able to come in and out more freely, or for some people it might mean, it could just mean all sorts of different things. The amount of space that people need is going to vary, and it could, you know, and a lot of that is based on our own cultural references and different life experiences. Let's see, and Karen is asking, what is a symbol for distributive conflict? So it's like this, like a little shuffleboard, like moving around the different resources, or kind of rearranging pieces. It's kind of like like the slide. So does anyone have, can anyone think of a different example for distributive conflict, or anything that kind of comes up when you think about distributive conflict? Come on, y'all. I know it's still kind of early, but don't be shy.
I definitely had something come up.
Yeah. What does that remind you of?
I'm one of those say heck of stuff, but I came late, so. Well, it's less about a resource, but more about like material resource, and more about emotional resource. Mm-hmm. And what I think about is, for example, within my Black community, when people say Black Lives Matter, and some people feel like that has to only be a certain group of type of Black people, and they feel really triggered if it's like, oh, put you know, trans people, you know, in the center of the circle, which really, and when you're in the center of a circle, that really means you're more protected. And the reality is everybody is targeted, you know, within Black community and outside of the Black community, but specifically to this, like it's constantly like a scarcity mindset, I feel like, is what causes some of us to feel like there's not space to talk about all the different intersectionalities that are under the umbrella of living while Black. So that's been coming up for me a lot lately, and I just realized that it was a scarcity thing.
Thank you so much for naming that. That's so on point and so relevant. And unfortunately, yeah, that's often reality. People feel that way. And then Jorge also just said capitalism in general, right? Living in this capitalist context, it just breeds a scarcity mentality, and there's this feeling of just not enough and not having enough space. So especially for marginalized folks, we see that often. And then again, it leads to a lot of that kind of infighting we were speaking of earlier. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Amani. Really appreciate that example. And so we're gonna move on. And oh yes, and so thank you. We have the last type of conflict is a values conflict. And Nora says, yes, capitalism is the epitome of distributive conflict. Yes. Thank you all. Let's see, so for values conflict, does somebody want to read that one out loud? Don't be shy, y'all. Anybody? It's okay. I could read it out loud if no one wants to. It's like
Values conflict, different values, different vision.
yeah. So having different values and different visions, and so it's kind of like what we were talking. There's a little bit of a values conflict in every conflict. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. We all have shared values, but we might have different visions or different ideas about where we want to assign meaning in any given moment or given situation. And so we're always kind of in negotiation with our values, but that's why it's so important as we're thinking about the type of conflicts we're in, to be able to recognize and identify and position ourselves to know kind of what our stance is, so we could come back to, okay, but what are the commonalities? What are our shared values? How can we all get our needs met in the situation? And what is the overlap? And so let's see if we move on to the next slide here. We also want to talk about the levels of conflict, right? So there's types of conflict, and then there's also different levels of conflict. This stuff is layered. And so the first level of conflict is a normal conflict. And that is when, let's see, does someone want to read it out loud?
Levels of conflict. Normal.
Yeah, thank you.
Resulting from normal pressures, i.e. budget, role expectations. Communication strategies can be used to prevent conflict escalation. Prevention is key.
Yes. So the normal level of conflict, right? Normal pressures. So this is when, you wake up in the morning, your alarm didn't go off. Maybe you spill the milk. Maybe, you're low on gas. It's like, okay, they're annoying things, but it's fine. It's life. You're going to get through it, and it's not going to stop you from going through your day. It's just kind of like the day-to-day, like rolling with whatever it is that comes up. Just the like gravity, right? Whatever happens, it's just a part of life. And so this is where communication strategies are really important. And so we could practice that NVC. Prevention is key. At this level of conflict, there's ways to de-escalate before it turns into a next level of conflict, which is the pervasive conflict. So does somebody want to read out pervasive conflict, please?
Atmosphere of tension and emotion, resulting from multiple pressures or accumulation of unresolved minor disagreements. Nonviolence is needed to lower conflict level and problem solve. Intervention is key.
Yeah, and so this is kind of where, maybe you spill the milk, maybe your car wasn't starting as quickly as you wanted to, you couldn't find a parking spot. It's kind of the regular day-to-day stuff, but as it starts to build and accumulate, there's more and more frustration, and so it's more pervasive. Now it's not just like, oh, this one isolated incident. Now you're like bringing this energy of like, to wherever you're going throughout the rest of the day. It's pervasive, it's in the atmosphere, it's in the environment, and it's just growing frustration. And so this is where like intervention is really key. And so maybe with normal level of conflict, you know, you lost your keys, you ask somebody to borrow their keys, it's fine, you can move on with the day. A pervasive level of conflict, intervention is really key. And so you want to actually address the conflict more directly. And so maybe it's, you know, that could look different ways. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about actual like tools for de-escalation. But intervention could be anything from just taking a break, stepping outside of the conflict, taking a moment for yourself, you know, separating different parties involved, whatever it is, but really actually acknowledging, oh, this is like something's happening here and we need to actually address it. We can't just move on with our day. Because if we do, it's going to turn into a next level of conflict, which is the overt conflict. And so this is when, somebody want to read out the overt conflict? So overt conflict is when conflict is now, it's in full bloom, it's being actually like acted out physically, often resulting from, again, cumulative effect of past incidences that have not been resolved in mutually satisfactory ways. So need to intervene to stop actions. And that could be anything. This is when, you know, you start to see shouting, physical violence, you really see the escalation. And so separate parties in conflict, and they need to discuss in order to de-escalate. And this is where management is key. And so intervention is where you could still kind of address the conflict. You know, you figure out what needs to get done. Management, overt, this is when it's like full blown, you know, people are going at it. It's like, it's hit the fan. We need to really figure out, okay, like, how are we going to actually bring this back down? And so we talk about the levels of conflict because it's really important when we're able to identify the signs and really recognize what are the different levels of conflict. We could say to ourselves, oh, this is not normal anymore. This is pervasive. I need to bring it back down. Or, oh, this is actually overt. I can physically see what's happening. This is like a really intense form of violence. Let's bring it back down and de-escalate. And so there's always opportunities to just notice and to de-escalate. And so when someone's, I mean, I gave some examples here of shouting and physical violence, right? But when you think about overt conflict, what are some things that you really think of or see? Like maybe some visuals, like what are some colors, some feelings? What does this remind you of when you think of overt conflict?
Do you want an example?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for instance, you know, some neighbors are playing loud music all the time. And so this, you complain, nothing is resolved, you talk, nothing is resolved. It's to the point that it just explodes because people play music all the time very loud, so you respond to that, doing something else to bother them. So this, what is not very clear, I mean, it's like the line between the, what do you call it, the perversive and overt is just very thin. It's almost like they're kind of, you know, one leading to another. You know what I'm saying? So it's very hard. It's just, I understand it, the repetition of the same action over and over and over. So when you say the solution for the perversive is intervention, and for the overt is the management. It's just, can you develop this a little bit more?
To develop, I'm sorry, I missed that last part. Is that a question? To develop?
So you say that the solution for the perversive conflict is intervention, and for the overt is management. So as I say, these two levels of conflict, they are very close. I mean, the line between them is very thin. So what I like to do is develop a little bit more these two levels of conflict.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you for saying that. It is, the line is really close. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of how to really recognize and discern like when we're at a normal or pervasive or overt level of conflict. And then later on when we talk about de-escalation a little bit more explicitly, we're going to get into that and address that piece.
Okay.
And so we also have, yeah. So
can I add something to the overt?
Yeah, go ahead. Is that Melody? Yeah.
Yes, thanks. I'm just thinking that, you know, it says the conflicts in full bloom and it's resulting from cumulative effects. And I'm just recalling times where, you know, someone can kind of show up in that state. So it's like the cumulative thing might have happened separate from the scenario, you know, it might be they're angry about their own thing, or there's cumulative things that happen in their personal life. And then you can just show up to a completely new situation in that state of like, you know, at the tip end of your cumulative effect of incidents that have happened elsewhere or within even, you know.
100%, absolutely. And thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for naming that and bringing that to the group, because yeah, and like I was saying earlier, so much of this work is about just coming back to ourselves and being regulated in ourselves. And so I think the more that we're able to kind of de-escalate for ourselves, the more we're also just aware in other people of kind of what their experiences are. And so one way, we're going to do a little bit more like hands-on activity. I'm going to let you all practice kind of identifying some of the signs of conflict. But one thing I want to share, a helpful way to kind of think about the levels of conflict, there's a running joke. So the normal level of conflict, folks are able to actually have folks are able to actually have a conversation. You're in dialogue, right? Two people could talk to each other. You're able to talk out whatever it is, use some NVC, and get to a mutually satisfactory point. When you get to the pervasive level of conflict, it's no longer a monologue, it's a dialogue. Or excuse me, it's no longer a dialogue, it's a monologue. This is when folks are talking over each other. They're often yelling at each other in each other's faces. So you're not hearing anything the other person's saying. It's not even a conversation anymore, it's a monologue. It's just like, you're just in you're like, no, blah, 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 like listen to me. There's no mutual exchange. And then joke is the overt level of conflict. It's not a dialogue or a monologue. There's no logs left because you've actually physically picked up the log and like hit it over the person's head, right? This is where it actually gets violent and it's more physical. And so it's just a fun way to kind of think about it. So a dialogue, monologue, pick up a log. And so think about some of the signs. Normal level of conflict, again, maybe you're frustrated, but you're still getting along through your day, you're breathing fine. Pervasive, maybe you're growing frustration. Maybe you're like huffing and puffing a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit harder to catch your breath. Maybe you're just like not as like physically present with your body language. And then overt conflict, you know, you've seen it, we've all felt it, that feeling of just like tension and like feeling triggered and activated in your body of just being super, just kind of like, I can't regulate, I'm not present, just like being kind of over the top, right? So that's just, yeah, quick overview of kind of the types and levels of conflict. And I want you all to practice this. And so again, really identifying what are the signs. So when you're out in the world, you could see, okay, that's what that is. Oh, I need to de-escalate, or I need to position myself in this way. It's kind of like a martial art. Like it's just about, it takes practice. And so we're gonna, for this next activity, we're gonna look at a video and we're gonna pull it up right here in just a minute. So we're gonna look at an example of conflict, and this is an example from the real world. And I'm gonna give you all we're gonna watch the clip, and then after the clip, we're gonna break out into groups, and I want you all to kind of discuss within your breakout groups, what did you think were the types of conflict that emerged from this clip that you noticed, and also what were the different levels of conflict and when did it get escalated? So just pay attention to that as you're watching the clip.
Hear it now.
And try again here. Just a moment.
I love that you use reality TV for this.
Yeah, it's kind of just a funny, silly way to bring in some humor. It's also just like such a relevant example, right? We can all kind of relate being in shared living spaces. Conflict arises, and that's real. And it's a lot, again, it's one of those things where we could like look at it out there, but it's a lot harder when it's in our space. And so, I thought that'd just be like a fun way to kind of explore the different types and levels of conflict. And so think about in your breakout groups, maybe just take, just like 10 minutes and discuss what are the different types. It might be more than one, and that's fine. And it might be different for different folks, but kind of think about what were some of the types of conflicts that you notice, and then also the levels and the points of escalation. If you notice it escalate at certain points or de-escalate at certain points, if you could identify. So I think, yeah, do we all feel good with the instructions? Yeah, seeing some head nods. Okay, great. So Sarah's gonna break us out. Just a moment.
Hey, Luis, you may have stepped away, but you do have should have something that allows you to go into breakout room 3 if you click join.
I wish I had it in front of me.
Yeah.
But that would be easier.
Well, actually, I written down not everything, but something. But I had issues with the video because I couldn't understand very well, and it was like a shopping. But to me, the only conflict, I'm sure, is the perversion, because there was not a dialogue. It was like people talking on top of each other. So I just let somebody else talk.
Yeah. And the other thing I noticed, that I did notice, was at the end, it was overt conflict. I thought they were just saying, well, you stay over there and I'll stay over here. I agree. I also got confused about the whole way what was going on. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah.
I guess it's a TV program. Never seen it before.
Neither.
So what are the other people thinking about?
So
The thing I noticed.
Sorry, just take a couple more minutes and then I'll circle back with y'all soon.
Sure. Thing I noticed the most was that they were not at all listening to each other. Each person was talking into the room.
We have four levels of conflict. We've identified. Was the exercise to have all of them listed, or name one more predominant?
Just whatever you saw. I mean, the main thing is to notice what are the signs for each.
The signs for what?
The signs for each level. So if you had, if they're like multiple levels of conflict, if it got escalated, like what were the signs that let you know that, oh, now it's switching to pervasive, or now it's
great. Okay, thank you.
And we're gonna circle back with a group in just a minute, but if y'all want to discuss some kind of closing thoughts around some of the types and levels. Y'all get to talk about maybe like what are some of the types of conflict?
Yeah, we talked about the types, but we didn't really talk about explicitly about like what led up to them, or I guess we mentioned it, yeah. Someone feel like they have the information to share with the group?
All right, should I go ahead and end?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
welcome back. All right. Waiting for the rest of our friends. More folks here. All right, if you want to get some water, make sure everyone's drinking enough water. All right, got some more friends with us. Okay. And I think that might be, is that
Yep.
everyone's?
We're all back. Yep.
Thank you, group. Y'all lit. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone want to share back? What were some types and levels of conflict that you noticed from that clip? And I want to share too, I'm just doing a lot of like quick front loading. I didn't kind of warn you all that you were going to be watching the clip to observe for signs beforehand. So I know it was a lot of information to take in, but we are going to, NCLT is going to email out all the slides so you'll have all the information. So just to kind of give you a little taste to kind of thinking about, yeah, what are some signs, or excuse me, yeah, some signs for the types and levels of conflict. So I heard some good conversation in some of the groups I popped in on. And yeah, does anyone want to share? What were some things that you saw? What were some things you talked about in your groups?
Group 2 was great. So since I have talked a lot, I delegate the talking to somebody else.
Yeah, so it started, yeah, there's talking to each other and then it shifted a little bit. And then, yeah, does anyone else, what did y'all talk about in your groups? Maybe somebody we haven't heard from as much. Don't be shy, y'all.
I could go for our group. So what we saw was that they had a values conflict, like conflicting values. It seemed like the guy kind of wanted to join this community to like make friends and be a part of some kind of group. And the girl, we're not really sure what her values were coming into the show. And because of the different values, it seemed like there was some conflict. He wanted everyone to enjoy the meal, and because I guess she didn't like him, she wanted to do her own thing with her friends. And I guess that would have been like, that's like a normal level of conflict, but then it kind of escalated to pervasive once they started like talking over each other and you know, having that monologue versus dialogue as opposed to having a dialogue together. And yeah.
Yeah, and you could see it at first. He's like, oh, I'm annoyed, but it was like, okay, whatever. But then he was still trying to engage in conversation and they were trying to talk. And then it was just like not even a conversation, right? And so it was just like, it was really subtle, but if you really pay attention, you start to notice like, oh, it's actually getting overt. Oh, it's escalating. And the values conflict, definitely, like a lot of times, especially in shared living spaces, right? It's a really intimate thing to be in shared living spaces with someone. And so there's assumptions, often, almost always there's assumptions around why are we here? Like, what is our intention for being in this space together? And what does that mean to each of us? And so just being able to identify like what, you know, really, why are we here? And to be able to have those uncomfortable conversations be like a huge opportunity for the relationships to deepen. And it might be that, you know, you realize that, oh, actually we're here for different reasons, but we're going to function together because this is helping us get our goals met like independently, regardless. We might go our own ways, right? Like I think at some point they're like, you go over there, I'm going to go over here. That's fine. But at the end of the day, they're still like on this reality TV show together. They're still living together. There's still some overlap there. And so, yeah, Amani, thank you. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Well, Jorge spilled some tea that I didn't know, which was that the girl apparently was going out with her sister. So, because we started the same point, like, oh, family values, independence, which might kind of still be at play. But if she going out with her sister, then obviously they value the same thing. So then we kind of thought about maybe they have the same goal but different methods, like they're taking different paths to reach their own need. And then I don't see him here, but the dope thing that he said was like maybe they both had the same goal, but they were trying to get their need of connection met in different ways. Something about connection. It was a lot going on there.
Yeah, so I heard, so there's values conflict, there's the mutually exclusive conflict, and then also the pathway conflict, right? So there's different layers to this stuff again. And you reminded us to bring up a good point of the values conflict.
Sima, you're frozen.
Able to be have conversation.
We lost you there for a second.
Uh-oh, okay. Let's see, am I back?
You're back, yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Oh, adventures in Zooming. Okay, so yeah, just coming back, I don't know where I left off, but coming back to just knowing that there's values conflict is inherent in every conflict, and really recognizing like what is the overlap, what are our shared values, so that we can make sure everybody's getting their needs met. And so maybe if they had an opportunity to have a conversation with each other and be in dialogue, they could have talked about family and had a conversation around why family is so important to them, and then, you know, maybe could go a little bit deeper. But there's always lots of layers to unpack, and the more we're able to just recognize the signs, the more we could go deeper to really just get to focus on what are the needs and underlying feelings. And yeah, is there anything else, any other observations from that clip that anyone wanted to share out?
I think that's something that continues to strike me, is when something starts out as an interpersonal, seeming like an interpersonal conflict, that obviously like the whole field, and you know, is affected. And so it just raises questions for me on the kind of conversation. Maybe this falls into sort of like the prevention is key, or what are the agreements, you know, what are the agreements that, what are the shared values or the vision for that household? We don't have that information, but just from, you know, what we saw, you know, left me with questions on, you know, what is the container of the household relationships there to basically be able to have an opportunity to intervene with care for both of them, to be able to unpack some of, you know, whether or not there's, you know, what's really going on underneath the surface of that reactivity.
Yeah, and thank you so much. That's a really great segue. So we're actually going to talk about like we're going to move into how can we create those structures and create that container so we can make sure that we are intervening and managing situations appropriately before the situation escalates. And so we're going to go back to our slides here in a second, and want to look at kind of, you know, one of the ways that we could really avoid a lot of unnecessary conflict is just being intentional with our decision making, and again, making sure the structures are in place so there is kind of a buffer for us. And so there's different ways. A lot of like co-housing situations or collective living situations or any community spaces, at any point there's always choice points and different opportunities to respond. And so we're thinking about what is our choice points and thinking about decision making. It's a similar thing where oftentimes there's assumptions that we know how to do decision making, or that there's processes already in place. And oftentimes that might not be the case, right? And so we want to be really explicit anytime we're making a decision, what is our actual decision-making process that we're using? And there's different ways to do this that might be more inclusive or exclusive than others. And so, so just like a little infographic, and it goes from, you can see there's like a spectrum, or it goes right from one direction from authoritative to the other direction to collaborative. And it's just a nice little visual to kind of think about how do we want to be in relationship to our decision making. And so there's some decisions in any situation, in a collective living situation, or, you know, wherever it is in community, that is actually going to be more of an authoritative kind of, there's not going to be a lot of input, just going to make an executive decision for the sake of time or whatever it is, and you're not going to have a group participation. The leader's just going to make the decision, and that's just what it is, right? And then maybe it's something in the middle, where you all could decide as a household, where maybe, okay, there's not a lot of, we want to solicit input from folks, but we also want to make sure that there's enough, again, of that container. And so we could delegate responsibility decision making to smaller subgroups. And so we can make sure that folks are informed, maybe, you know, have designated like experts or folks that are, you know, more skilled or specialized in certain topics. And then ultimately, you know, those folks could make final decision. Or we could have, right, and a more collaborative, more inclusive kind of example of decision-making is a consensus, where there's a lot of room for conversation and input and collaboration, and there's a lot of different perspectives. And the intention is really to have each person's input valued, heard, and considered. And then at the end, right, everyone's going to make a decision, and it might not be the decision that everybody is super excited about, but it's a decision that everybody could live with. And then if we're really lucky, right, and a really like super collaborative, if everyone's on the same page and same mindset and everything's vibing and good and we're good to go, it could be a unanimous decision where everyone agrees, there's no differences in opinions, everyone's totally on the same page. And then this is where, you know, everybody gets the opportunity to decide on the decisions being made. And so unanimous decision making is great, but it's often not always practical. It's easier for kind of like low level stuff. You know, it's going to be a little bit more complicated if there's something, it's kind of bigger stakes that's going to affect the whole community longer term. Consensus, right? It's going to be really collaborative, but there's also not necessarily everybody is going to be super excited about it all the time, and that's fine. You're choosing to still function together. And so there's, yeah, so just to say that there's different ways to be inclusive and different ways to engage in decision making. What happens, again, a lot of times there's an assumption. We assume when there's a decision that needs to be made, we assume sometimes, oh, there's going to be opportunity for input, or oh, this person's just going to like take the lead on this project anyway, so I'm not even going to speak up. And so the more we could really be clear and hone in and get to the heart of the matter, be explicit, what is our process that we're using for this? What are the expectations, outlining all of that out ahead of time, the easier it's going to be down the road to be able to address conflict as it arises as we need to. And so that's just kind of one tool, and y'all are going to have, you know, at different times, there's going to be different processes that are going to be more relevant or more useful than others, but just to kind of give you an overview. And there's a lot of different ways that people could engage in decision making. You know, some folks do majority rule, some folks do Robert's rule. These are just some examples to say that there's so many different ways to do this. And the more explicit we could be, the better it's the easier it's gonna be to help facilitate addressing conflict later on.
What's Robert's rule?
I'm not, you know what, I said that, but I'm actually not entirely sure. I think it's similar to majority rule, where I think Robert's rule is where somebody offers input and then the conversation keeps. I wonder, actually, Sarah, do you know about Robert's rule? You might be able to speak to this more. I'm not sure.
I feel bad. I don't know the specifics, but we can send that out afterwards, though, so that people have it as a resource.
I think it's my understanding is it's similar to majority rule, where it's like it's basically blocking people from consensus because there's a lot of. Okay, yeah, so used by big organizations and legislatures. So it's a very bureaucratic style of decision making. And I don't know the details of it, but there's a link for Wikipedia, perfect.
Very formal, it's very formal. There's this whole process of like, I move that we do this and I second that we do this. And then there's a vote and it's kind of majority rule, but it's got a structure to it.
Got it, okay, thank you, Diane.
It's not collaborative.
So, and again, there might be, so we can move on to our next slide to share that there's considerations, right, for decision making. So we don't always, we might not always want to be super collaborative, right? Sometimes it's going to be appropriate to be more authoritative. I feel like sometimes it gets a bad rap. We feel like in community spaces, we want to be super inclusive. And I have a good friend, Chris Moore-Backman, who wrote a book entitled The Gandhian Iceberg, talks about going deeper in our constructive programming and community. And he talks often about the tyranny of inclusivity. Sometimes if there's too much diversity of experiences within the group, it's not going to be helpful to be so inclusive because there's not going to be enough of that container. And so some things we want to think about, thinking about what decision making, how do we want to engage in decision making? We want to think about what are the shared values in the group? again, is the level of diversity of experiences, what's the level of diversity of experiences within the group? Is there too broad of a range, or is it enough of a range for folks to be able to kind of have similar references and be on the same page? Also, again, think about the timeline. How urgent is a matter being discussed? If it's something that needs attention tomorrow, you're probably not going to have a long, drawn out consensus decision-making process. It might be more of an executive decision. You might get a little bit of input, but maybe not, right? But it's important to be explicit to identify, actually, we're just going to make an authoritative decision because there's a sense of urgency. And then the level of skills. And I feel like this is an important one that doesn't get discussed that often. So do individuals have more experiences or comfort with certain processes over others? So, and it goes to the next point also of cultural relevance, right? So if folks have more experience, if folks are coming from a cultural orientation where they're more familiar with an authoritative style of decision-making, they might want to be included in group decision-making processes, but they just might not feel comfortable yet. They might not be familiar. They might not be practiced at it. So it might be a little bit awkward. It might take some work, and vice versa, right? Sometimes if folks are used to being in collective households where things are really informal and folks practice consensus and there's a lot of discussion, and all of a sudden there's a decision that needs to be made, and it's a really kind of, an executive decision, and there's not a lot of room for input, folks might feel slighted, like, wait a minute, where's room for my experience? And again, so often in shared living spaces, there's so many assumptions made around whether or not folks know where things are at, or folks understand each other's orientations to sharing space and in different cultural decisions and meaning making, right? And so think about, like, what are people's levels of skills and familiarity? What are the different timelines? What are the values? Like, really consider all that, and then decide, how are we going to make this decision? It's always going to be complex. There's always going to be different layers, but the more explicit we could be about it, the more we could kind of address unforeseen conflict down the road in a more constructive way. And yeah, and just make sure that everybody feels seen. And even if their opinions aren't necessarily, or the input isn't necessarily integrated into the final decision, just knowing that there was some recognition of where they were coming from, I think could go a really long way to have empathy around people's different experiences. So we're gonna keep it moving, and I want to say that I understand that these are really kind of talking about this stuff in really kind of simple ways, trying to break it down, but this is really hard work, and in the day-to-day it could be really complex and really complicated for so many different reasons due to social conditioning. And so want to think about, like, what are the actual tools for de-escalation? We talked about the levels, talked about different types of conflict, but how do we actually de-escalate where we're in that moment where we feel uncomfortable, we don't know what to do? There's different ways to do this. And so some tools that we could use for de-escalation is prevention, right? We talked about prevention for a normal level of conflict. And could somebody read out definition of prevention here, just to make sure we're all still here and flow in with each other?
Assesses needs and wants.
Thank you. So assesses needs and wants. And so with prevention, assesses needs and wants, we want to really think about, right, for normal level conflict, prevention is key. And so we want to kind of, this is where you're going to get like a temperature check and think about what is it that folks are actually wanting and needing in a given situation. And so there's different ways to do this. And so, yeah, there's different examples. And so we could think about, we want to keep it flowing here. So yeah, so we'll go over each one in just a second. We could give examples of prevention.
Sorry, Sima, should I move forward into where they go into the details in the slide, or do you want to keep it at a higher level?
No, yeah, this is perfect. This works. So we'll just go into yeah, each one at a time. So for prevention, for community agreements, that's a perfect example of a prevention. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, right? So setting agreements ahead of time, that's going to help ground future conversations, because you'll always have a reference point. You have something to come back to. If there is a conflict that arises, you could prevent it by going back and actually letting folks know this isn't in our community agreement. And sometimes it could be just as simple as that, like a simple reminder. Polling, similarly, just kind of getting like a qualitative assessment, temperature check. How are people feeling? So an example here, so leaders might want to ask a question like, if you were to decide now, this isn't the final decision, but as of now, like how many of you would be in favor of doing option 1? So you're always kind of considering everyone's backgrounds and kind of considering where folks are at. And then other forms of prevention or normal level of conflict. So what could, so talked about prevention is key, so nonviolent communication is a great example. What might that look like for a normal level of conflict? How can we use, nonviolent communication, for example, or another? So, okay, Amani says, yeah, other forms of prevention, general activities to build relationship. Exactly. So all that community stuff, right? All the stuff you do in the beginning to kind of make sure those relationships are in place. That's all that part of prevention. And it can even be something as simple as like, you know, we all have normal levels of conflict every single day. If somebody's in a bad mood, it could be as simple as just giving them a compliment, like a smile, right? Just some of that like really basic stuff that seems small, but actually is huge in terms of preventing longer term, more escalated conflict. And then Jorge gave us a sentence starter. Yeah, so I am feeling, I am needing, right? So just like really helping folks to really think about how can we communicate just simply and directly before things get escalated. Awesome, thank you. Okay, and so another, and I'm moving, again, I recognize I'm moving through a lot of this quickly. And so if there's any, if you want me to slow down, if there's any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm gonna be tracking you all. And again, we are gonna send all this information out. But just to say, yeah, prevention, have those systems and structures in place, practice at NVC, nip it in the bud before it gets escalated. Another form of de-escalation, so prevention, and then also moving on to the next one, we have intervention. And so could somebody read out, could somebody want to read the intervention slide for us?
Once a decision is made by whatever mechanism, it is important that everyone know what is expected of them and how they are going to be held responsible by understanding actions required, due dates, budgets, etc. Always practice role clarity and use SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely goals.
We got cut off there. So other forms of intervention, so examples of nonviolent action. So intervention, so this is when somebody's already in conflict, right? And so you want to step in and kind of figure out, okay, how are we going to, you need to address the situation, figure out how are we going to hold folks responsible and make sure that we are now de-escalating. And so it's so important. Role clarity is a really, role clarity is a really important way to do this. You want to make sure, this is where you want to make sure folks understand the expectations and the implications of their actions. And so there's different ways to do this, right? So it could just be actually outlining. This is where you're going to kind of bust out the PowerPoints, bust out the chart paper, start taking notes. You're going to track information more intentionally because you want to actually intervene. And let's see. Okay, so Amani says other forms of intervention, using the buddy system, uninvolved pair share, and recommitment and out. Amani, do you want to say a little bit more what you mean by that?
Yeah, I just mean people people are not involved in conflict, partnering with someone who is, to one, just be there for them and then help them get back on track to what they are committed to do, and also be a voice for if the commitment is not met, you know, by this, then this is what's gonna happen. Like the out is like the hard line, like, and it's not personal, but somebody needs to let you know that we are, as a group, are not going to like sacrifice something due to the conflict you're having with the person, but we will support you and take over if needed.
Yes, yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. This is when you're creating those boundaries, you're letting folks know, actually, this is the line, this is what you need, this is what you need, and like, where are we, right? Like for everybody to really stop and intentionally locate themselves. And so asking for examples of nonviolent action, this is where there's like, we need to be more proactive with our nonviolent approach. And so a lot of times in community spaces, right, we might see a conflict, but we take a back seat and we will be nonviolent, but I think not actually escalating the situation, but without actually intervening in the conflict, we're still supporting the conflict to itself, right? The conflict to unfold. And so really thinking about intervention in a proactive way. How can we take action to intervene to make sure that folks know what the out is, what is the threshold, what is the boundary, making sure it's measurable, making sure folks know their expectations, just really like outlining that stuff, whether it's physically, like visually writing it out, or just emotionally, whatever it is, but really meeting that level of conflict where it's at. And the most important thing, again, is just, role clarity, making sure at this level that folks know what's expected of them and what are the consequences of their actions.
Sima, there was a comment in the chat from Amanda about, how easy or hard is this to do if you're a party to the conflict versus being in a facilitator role?
Yeah, I mean, it's both and, right? And so I think it's on the individual when you're in a conflict to be able to self-regulate. And again, coming back to self, figuring out, okay, what do I need in this moment? Assessing needs and wants for yourself. And then also for a facilitator too, to be able to recognize, maybe, these people aren't super like self-regulated yet in this moment. They're going to get there, but they just need that time. Like maybe it's intervention. This is where you actually separate the people. And so they have that time to be able to then like self-regulate deeper, to be able to de-escalate and come back. And one of the things that's important to name too about intervention is that, and de-escalation in general, let's see. And so intervention, it could be, sometimes this is where you actually do need like a third person or a third party to come in and intervene between two people who are in conflict. But the work is also, right, it's like both and, because the work is also on the individuals to be able to regulate themselves. And a lot of times when we talk about de-escalation, we think about the work is for folks to be able to de-escalate, to be able to come back into conversation. And so we want to be able, we rush to that part to be able to come back, to be able to identify our needs and to have that conversation. But when we're de-escalating for ourselves and also for other people, the de-escalation is just self-regulating. So you're not self-regulating to be able to yet come back into conversation. You're just self-regulating to get to a point where you're more grounded in your body and you're more present and more just in your own self and in your own experience. It's not necessarily always about intervention yet. Did that? Let's see. And Ginny said, I have taken timeouts during meetings where conflicts is developing to mentally put myself in other person's position, try to figure out what they're not communicating. Yes, so the timeouts are huge. Yes, yes, yes. So there's, and so I'm gonna actually move on and kind of talk about the next level, and we could come back to this because they're all the different levels are all connected. So management, right? So this is Murphy's Law. Does somebody want to read out the management slide?
Murphy's Law says that if something can go wrong, it will. So it is important to outline potential conflict management procedures ahead of time. Restorative practices can be applied on a case-by-case basis. Different conflicts may require different types of processes: restorative dialogue, mediation, group facilitation, etc. What are some other forms of management or examples of nonviolent intervention?
Awesome, and thank you all. And just, quick time check. I apologize, we are going a little bit over, and so we were planning on ending at 1. So if folks feel like they need to leave, totally understand and respect you doing that. I apologize, we're a little bit over. And if you feel like you're able to just be here for just a few more minutes, we're gonna be wrapping up soon with the closing. So thank you, Amanda, for management, for reading that out loud. And so this is where you want to be proactive in your approach ahead of time. Management is about figuring out, creating those structures and systems in place. So before you even get to the point where you need to intervene to a conflict and actually implement consequences or boundaries, you know kind of what those processes are, what the consequences or boundaries are. You already have like a management system in place. And so it could look different. It's going to look different. It's on a case-by-case basis. So different conflicts are going to require different things, right? Maybe it's mediation, maybe it's group facilitation, maybe it's a restorative dialogue. There's lots of different ways to do restorative justice and peace building. And the more, again, explicit you could be, outlining all of that ahead of time and managing that and having that in place, the better off you're going to be. So then when folks are at the place where they're in conflict, somebody intervenes to help them to kind of de-escalate, get centered, get back to their breath, get back to themselves, calm down. They already know what what's kind of waiting for them on the other end. There's already a support system in place, so to speak. And it doesn't have to just be, one of these kind of options that's outlined. There's also different forms of management. And so different examples of nonviolent intervention in order to manage conflict. That could be anything from, it could be a restorative dialogue or mediation, but it could also just be, you might get to a point where somebody realizes, oh, actually, like this isn't going anywhere for the sake of this situation. I need to move, or I need to, whatever it is. But really managing for yourself kind of ahead of time, what is it that we're able to offer? What are the processes? What is it that's going to be helpful to the overall conflict? And so Mani says, really interested in other forms of management, especially communal formal style. Yeah, and so the main thing about management is really, I would say, just being proactive with conflict, right? And I think the more that you're doing that, there's different management styles that are going to come up for you just organically. The more that you're engaged, the more you're going to be able to think about it creatively. And so, bye, Diane. Thank you so much for joining us. And we are, so thank you all. We're going to just kind of end there and say that if there's any more, I know again, we kind of went over a lot of information, but if there's any other questions about what are the systems and structures, just want to offer that there are lots of different ways to do this work. But if you want to kind of get more information around what are different restorative processes, what could mediation look like, what are different, like formal systems to have in place, I'm more than happy to have that conversation. So please stay in touch, reach out to me. My email is here, and you can also contact Sarah at NCLT. And just wanted to close us out with a quick quote from Jenny Nichols, who's an astrologer who I really like. And if you don't follow him on Instagram, I would encourage you all to do that. But I really like this quote because it just reminds us, it's a poem, and she just reminds us that so much of this work of peace building is really just about coming back to self, and coming back to love, and coming back to our shared humanity, and why we do this work in the first place, right? And so this poem is called Love Is. And so she says, love is not a mistake. Love is not an accident. Love is not a way out. Love is our way in. Love is a risk. Love is a loss. Love is a revolution. Love makes clear every fear we must work through. Love brings with it every reason to make such effort. Love initiates us, leaving us forever changed, forever marked, forever awakened to what could be. The love we cultivate, the love we elevate, the love we choose to accentuate speaks volumes about who we are and how we define our lives. It speaks volumes about what we are willing to give up. It speaks volumes about what we are able to withstand. It speaks volumes about the capacity of our hearts to grow no matter what is promised us, no matter what is delivered to us. Love is, quite simply, the only thing worth the difficulty. Love is, quite plainly, the only thing worth decorating oneself for. Love is, quite frankly, the only thing that can keep us honest. Love needs to be at the center of all we do if we are to do it for long, if we are to do it with sincerity, if we are to do it with any success. Love needs our actions because it starves on words alone. Love needs our solidarity because it shrivels in isolation. Love needs our